Welcome back to another Top 10. I'm Tom Vasel.
I'm Zee Garcia. What's up?
And I'm Sam Healey.
Now, the Top 10s that we do, sometimes they are funny, sometimes they're controversial.
Silly.
But this one is really not that way, but I think it's one that's a useful thing that people ask. And this Top 10 educational games. Games that you can use in the classroom. Now, here's the thing, though. As with all our lists, how we put them together is probably different in that regard.
Sure.
For myself, I'm sticking mostly, almost completely, in the junior high school realm. Because if I did elementary educational games, I could beat almost every game is worth it for elementary.
Right.
So I'm looking at the high school realm, and I had a hard time making this list because to me there's hundreds of worthy games. So I tried to put them in, and I tried to hit a spectrum of different subjects. Some subjects I hit more than others, but you'll see.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I think most of my list would apply largely to high school, somewhat to middle school. And same idea. I want to cover a wide range of ideas. I also tried to avoid games that are educational versus an educational aid, like a gateway to teaching something, because I think those games are actually games and good, whereas here, learn this fact and then regurgitate it back to me are not games. So games largely...
What are you talking about? Like the ones that they actually sell in educational stores?
Yeah, like games that are educational for that's their sake. That's why they exist. I think are largely bad games. Whereas I think all of these games are games first, and they can be educational second.
Okay. Yeah, that made sense. It sounded like you were saying the opposite.
Oh, okay.
It sounded like you were saying that you were focusing more on actual educational games and not games that can be used as.
I'm really curious how much overlap we have on this list. I think we will have some.
I think so too.
Maybe.
I think there will be at least one, probably two games that are on all three lists.
3.5 games that will overlap.
Yeah, maybe.
Not really sure what that means, but 3.5. Let's get started.
Number 10.
All right, my number 10 is a game that I have used with people in the past. My son that has trouble with spatial organization. He has trouble, not a lot of trouble, but he's just not very good at it. So I've used it with my son in teaching him to be a little bit more spatial organization-ish. And it will help thought patterns and that type of thing. Rumus, or what it's called now, Blocus 3D. And it's a fun game that gives you certain patterns that you have to try to mimic on the actual board, and then you have a height restriction, and you have to try to fit all of your blocks in there. The person who fits all of your blocks, and your blocks are variations of like the Tetris type blocks.
3D.
But it's 3D. Yeah, they bend and twist in different directions, not just your regular Tetris shapes. But you have that height restriction, and you have to try to fit all of your blocks in. The person who fits the most blocks in wins, and it really helps getting your mind to work that way. It's a good exercise, I guess you could say, but it's still fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of... That's a category. I think I didn't even do that category, but it's a good one. Spatial, Gemblo, Blocus. But is it called 3D Blocus now?
It's called Blocus 3D. The original is called Rumus, Rumis. But if you look Rumus up on Board Game Geek, I believe it comes up as Blocus 3D now.
Yes.
All right. Now, one thing about games, I think, for educational purposes, is I don't necessarily have to like them, or I think, well, you guys like them. My like or dislike of a game, I'm prepping here. I think you use games that I'm not a huge fan of, but they might work in the classroom. But anyway, this is one I know at least you're not a fan of, and that's Robo Rally. But Robo Rally, I think, works really well in teaching logic or just following directions. And because it can go up to 8 people, that can fit a small classroom, or in a larger classroom, you can even project the board up on the board and show how the different robots move. You're programming robots and they move around. And kids get a kick out of that because it's silly fun and the robots shoot each other. And kids have a higher tolerance for that whole, ha, I just messed you up. And every guy's like, oh, yeah, you messed me up. Ah. Right. You know.
Wait till we're on the playground.
Top 10 bully-inducing...
Okay, so, but really, the kids get a kick out of that sort of thing. Yeah. But it does teach you, if you do this, and then you turn left, and then you turn right, this will happen. What is the best way to get from point A to point B? That's useful information, and I've used it in classes. Robo Rally.
Very cool. All right, my number 10 is a game that deals with, very abstractly given, so it's sort of a jumping off point to a bigger discussion, but it deals with things like evolution and genetics and world history. And that's Origin, which is a relatively new game.
Who's the designer?
I don't remember. It's a game that
Who's the publisher?
Asmodee put it out.
Oh, Origin. Oh, that's the one with the little wooden guys
people, and they start in Africa, the
you
cradle of civilization. Game. Yes. Well, you hate Robo Rally too.
Yeah.
They started in the cradle of civilization, and they spread out from there. And I think it's a good visual map to help. Like high school age kids get a sense of evolution. You can get into discussions about migration. I think it's a neat game, and I think it's a good jumping off point to some of those discussions. It even has like special power cards, which if you want to take it a step further, you can discuss. Okay, well, this power says this, but what real life artifact do you think these tribes could have invented to actually be able to move farther, to do this, to do that, to conquer neighbors, that sort of thing. So I think it could make for a good discussion topic. That's my number 10, Origin.
I'll tell you what. It made me want to jump off of something after I played it. So it probably is a good jumping off point.
All right. Well, joke aside, that seems... I guess I can see your point a little bit. I thought it was almost too abstract to be educationally useful.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of these are going to be kind of... a
lot of yours.
A lot of mine, yes, are going to be discussion topics that lead to good educational
I can
ideas.
See where he's coming from. It can start the discussion. It's
but you could play like... you could play Nothing Personal and say, now why did I stab you in the back?
That's on here.
Shameless promotion.
We'll get to that one very shortly.
Moving on.
Okay. Number 9.
We teach in American schools, so I'm going to pick a somewhat Ameriocentric game here, but you could probably pick a different election game. But my number 9 is 1960. 1960. Now, there's a lot of election games. There's the German election game, Die Macher. Actually, there's not...
Can you imagine trying to...
Yeah, that would be a tough one to bring in the classroom.
Kids, German politics.
No, but really, there's not a lot of... I haven't played many political games that weren't about the American political system. I don't know that many exist other than Die Macher.
Right.
But anyhow, the 1960 is the one I've chosen. There's Road to the White House. There's a lot of good ones, and I've used several of them. 1960, you can have... It's very simple. You play cards. You could play it over days in your classroom. Like kids take a turn each day and just show how the different votes in the states. And honestly, the electoral system in America is not the easiest thing to grok. It isn't, and I think this game does a good job at teaching that. And it uses an election that it's good for kids to be familiar with, the whole Nixon versus Kennedy. But at the same time, it's a close election, and so that makes it a fair game. Many American presidential elections have been somewhat skewed one way or the other, and those won't be nearly as interesting. 1960 was quite close. So that's my number 9, 1960.
Cool.
And that's it's by Jason Matthews. The company who published it was Z-Man, I think.
I believe so. All right, my number 9 is a little card game that came out many years ago, and it's actually a collectible card game, which died, but you could still find it. And this is called Anachronism, which is a game that they put out with... this game actually came out in conjunction with, or with assistance from, the History Channel.
Yeah.
And the game deals with basically historical figures, historical warriors. Most of them are, anyway. They talk like about... Beowulf is one of them, which is, it's
that's literature.
It's literature, right? And I think it's a neat, again, jumping off point to cool discussions, and the kids get a kick out of, or they would get a kick out of, having my Sun Tzu fighting your Richard the Lionheart, and discussing who these people are. And
But Z is failing to mention that it's not a very good game.
I think it's a fun game. I like it. It's also like 10 minutes.
Are you saying I could have
mean?
put Duel of Ages on my list?
Maybe. Oh, a lot of that is still made up. You know what I mean?
A good chunk of it is made up. But there's Kit Carson's in it. All right, anyway.
But anyway, I just think it's a cool historical jumping off point to, history is a rough. Like, it can be boring if you don't have something to kind of latch on to that's cool for you. Mm-hmm. And I think this game could pose a cool historical figure, and that could be the gateway into France during the time period of Richard the Lionheart, or Samurai. You know what I mean? I think it's a cool way to do that. So, again, my number 9, Anachronism. Simple little card game, but really cool historical figures and flavor.
Okay. My number 9 is kind of along the same lines as my number 10, but it's on a different level, I think, and that is Jimblo. He already mentioned it in passing.
Sorry.
But Jimblo is a two-dimensional, so it's a little bit easier to grasp, but it does have the octagonal shaped pieces, so it has more hexagonal.
Hexagonal, yeah.
So there's more faces to more sides of the shapes to manipulate, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. So it takes away the three-dimensional aspect, but it adds more two-dimensional facing aspects to it, and it's basically the same idea. You want to get rid of all of your pieces. You have the least number of gems left. So it's the same idea. It's just that a little bit of a different twist to it rather than the three-dimensional. It's just two-dimensional. So it's still the spatial organization, and I think that's really important. It's a good brain exercise mechanic. So that's my number 9, Jimblo.
All right.
Cool. All right, my number 8 is Thebes, which is a game that deals with archaeology, deals with ancient societies, ancient artifacts.
Sam loves your list.
I know. He hates all my games.
This is the games that Sam hates list.
Yes.
Apparently.
Yes. Thebes is a real fun game, I think. Sam hates it. But you can play the game at that level, or you can go just a little bit deeper and discuss the artifacts when they're pulled from the bag. Which, again, they give you a description of them in the rulebook. There's a whole sheet.
There is. There's a lot of artifacts.
With the history of the artifacts. You can deal with the civilizations you're exploring or digging up, the Greeks, the Palestinians, all of that. So I think there's plenty of discussion topics there. What are you saying?
I'm not saying anything.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my number 8, Thebes. I think it's valuable when it comes to that archaeology idea and looking into ancient civilizations.
As an aside, I think this is a great thing about board games. So many board games that we get come with these extra sheets that have all this information. Mm-hmm. A lot of historical board games will come with lots of history involved.
Yes.
Like I mentioned 1960. I know that its older sister game, Twilight Struggle, comes with a whole, tons of text. You really can learn a lot from reading that extra stuff.
Yep.
And so I would recommend you not skip it.
The Catan Geographies Germany comes with background on all of the monuments that you would build and why they built them. Even the map is historically created because each region that, for example, if there's a hex on the map of Germany that creates wheat, it's because that region of Germany is known for creating wheat.
Really?
They actually went that far into creating the map, so
That's
a lot
cool.
of games like that.
That's cool.
All right. Is that your number 8?
No, it's not. It's my number 11 probably for that specific reason. It comes with an almanac that you can read through, but the game itself doesn't actually teach anything unless you know that other stuff about how the map was made.
I think most games, if they're good games, don't really teach anything.
What?
You have
they
to.
do.
What?
Yeah, they do. They teach stuff.
I mean,
every game teaches something.
Error.
Maybe. Like, you play it and it sort of washes over you enough and you internalize some of that stuff. But you have to seek out that. You have to kind of put it on the table and be like, hey, look at this, let's discuss this. You have to kind of be active with that discussion.
I think a good game will teach you something without having to dig for it.
Maybe.
I mean, think about a lot of the games we talk about are teaching logical processes. They're teaching
That's right.
reasoning. They're teaching all of this stuff, and you don't know that you're learning that,
That's true.
but you are learning it.
That's true. That kind of thing, yes, absolutely.
Anyway, my number.
Anger
Well, that was a heated discussion.
anger management. Some games probably.
Number 8. My number 8. When I was teaching English as a second language in Korea, I learned very quickly that a lot of my students didn't have a real firm grasp on American geography, and in order to try to teach them American geography without making them feel like they were learning American geography, I taught them Transamerica. It's a very simple game. You can also use Trans-Europa. It's the same game, just with a European.
Not about America.
Right, it's not about America. Anyway, they would actually learn more about American geography while they were playing the game. At least they would know that Texas is down here, and Illinois is up here, and this is over here, and California is over here, and they would get that spatial recognition of where all of these geographical places were, and they didn't realize that they were learning it, but they were. And so I learned I used Transamerica a lot for geography.
Cool. All right. There's probably a lot of games that could fit that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll see more show up. Number 8 is one that I hesitate to put on the list because it's out of print, but you can easily find it on eBay or other places. And you made fun of me last time I put this on the list, but Spinergy. That's the game where you spin the 3 rings and you get 3 words, and then you have to do something like write a essay or like write a small thing on a short story. And then the one person who's a judge has to guess 3 words he thinks you will use in your short story.
Okay.
And this works really well in a English class setting because they have to write anyway, so you can why not make it into a game? Right. And it does produces creativity. Trying to think what words people might use and encourage you to use words you normally would not use. I think it's an excellent game. The only negative thing about Spinergy, other than that it's harder to find right now, is that the box is mega. It has those big 3. I mean, the box is like
massive.
It's a massive box, but it's a cool idea, and I think it fits perfectly into the English setting. So my number 8, Spinergy.
Number 7.
All right, my number 7 is a game I actually have used in my theater class. To encourage creativity, encourage storytelling, and as well as discussion about fairy tales, especially Grimm's fairy tales. And this game is called Fabula. Fabula, which originally was going to be called Grimm, and then they changed the name. I guess there was some issue there with calling the game Grimm, or maybe that would be too grim, is a game in which one person is representing one of the Grimm brothers, and everybody else is supposed to be a character who suggests to that writer a story. So it's a storytelling game, and and
there's a lot of those out there. You're saying this is one of the better ones?
I think this is a fun one because it encourages creativity because you're telling this fantastical story while restricting you with cards that are on the table that are like artifacts or items, and they will go away. So when you use one, it goes away, and so the pool of what you have available to tell a story with shrinks, which forces creativity. I think it's a fun one, and I think it's a good one for a creative thinking class, a theater class, an English class, even. So that's my number 7, Fabula. I think it's an interesting game. It's not the best thing to pull out and play with friends. I wouldn't do that, but in a class setting. Yes, it's a little bit like Spinergy. I feel the same way about it. It's good for class, but it's not... I don't want to pull it out here and play, like sit down here and play and write a story with you guys, but this works in class. So, my number 7, Fabula.
I'm getting worried about my prediction that we're going to have 3 games across the list, mostly because Zee's picking this really obscure stuff.
Yeah.
All right, my number 7...
It's okay.
My number 7 proved that Z and I needed more zoological knowledge. It's a great game about learning about fauna, because the game is called Fauna. Yes. And this is this is a game that shows a map of the world, and you have all these different animal cards and different. On your turn, you basically are bidding on where you think this animal lives in the world, or how much you think it weighs, or how long its tail is, etc., etc. And this sounds, it's kind of weird. The description sounds boring.
Yeah.
But it actually is a pretty fun game because you're trying to guesstimate where they are, and if you're close, you can still get points. Unless you happen to play with somebody who knows every fact about every animal in existence.
And guffaws at you every time you make a mistake.
I was going to say Snickers, but yes. We played this once.
Sorry, man.
Z was putting a cube out there like... So that's where you think the yellow-tailed gecko lives. But it really is a good game in that for a classroom setting.
Yes.
Because it's fun, you're trying to guess, and it's actual factual animals. So, my number 7, fauna.
My number 7
Flora.
is no. My number 7 is a game that I am actually going to begin trying to implement into my Bible classes at school, and that is a game called Journeys of Paul. Now, again, this is a game that you probably will have a difficulty getting a hold of because I don't believe it's in print anymore.
I don't know.
And, well, I don't believe it is, and it's pretty hard to find a copy of it. But if you can find a copy of it, it's worth your while, especially with the biblical aspect of it. I played a game at Gen Con that I hope, at Origins, that I hope gets published called Commissioned, and that's what got me thinking more about putting Journeys of Paul and implementing it into my class, because you can it shows how much of a struggle it was to get around all of the different things that could come up with C-Rex and being pulled off to jail in the middle of for no reason really, and that type of thing, and all these different things that you don't really think about as you're learning about Paul's journey around the Mediterranean area. And you play the game, and then you can stop and talk about, well, this is what happened, and these were the things circulating around when a certain event card comes up, or a lot of different ways you can implement it. So it makes the subject material become a living world rather than just words on a paper.
Ooh,
and I think that's what we're
my
looking
kind
for.
of game choice.
Wow.
So that's Journeys of Paul.
I got educated just listening to that.
Wow.
Number 6.
Okay, earlier Sam mentioned Trans-America and Trans-Europa to teach geography, and if you can get those games, and if you think they're even remotely fun, then good for you. But I think that a better game to teach geography is the series The 10 Days in USA, 10 Days in Africa, 10 Days in Asia, 10 Days in Europe, and 10 Days in South America. Each of these games shows a map, and what you're doing is you're trying to build a trip across them, and they all have to be adjacent though. And I think it really does teach you, what states are adjacent to Utah. Right. The Africa one, I really learned a lot about Africa geography because I didn't know what countries bordered each other, and so I thought that was very useful. And I think they're a great educational tool, and the way they're built, you could custom build it for a whole classroom. You could have enough cards for a whole classroom to draw cards, and everyone looks at the same map, because the map itself is just a placeholder.
Right.
You don't actually play on it. Right. You're just trying to put cards in order. So I think a great game, the 10-day series.
Just a reference point. The map is just a reference point.
Mm-hmm. All
right, my turn. All right, my number 6 is a game that I wanted to implement when I was teaching U.S. history. I'm no longer teaching U.S. history, but if you would like, I can share with you my ideas for using this game for U.S. history, and that is Twilight Struggle.
I spoiled him twice now.
During the Cold War era, that game is, like we were saying earlier, there's so much text.
Yeah, but that works for world history.
Yeah, world history too, right. Yeah, U.S. history or world history. Either one. I used to teach both. And I really wanted to try to implement it. I just never got around to doing it. But I think it would really make the Cold War era become alive. They didn't experience it like some of us did. But even then, when we experienced it, we were still kind of kids. We didn't get the full-blown... If we were experiencing the Cold War era,
I'd rather be
adults,
dead than red.
Yeah, right? So I think it'll make that era come alive, and all the struggle that was happening in the world. Not like there isn't struggle today, but all the tension that was there between U.S. and the USSR. I think that would really pull that off the page, and so Twilight Struggle.
The reason I picked 1960 over Twilight, because I really considered Twilight Struggle, is I just thought Twilight Struggle is fairly complex. I might use that only in an AP or an advanced honors class,
right?
Because it really is a lot. 1960 is not a spring chicken itself, but I think it's easier.
Well, our U.S. history class is taught at 11th grade, and I think 11th graders would be able to handle that. World history is taught at a 10th grade level, at least in our schools, so it would be it might be a little bit more difficult for them to grasp it. So that's why I was thinking more U.S. history than anything else. But I think higher level, high school, they would be fine with it.
Right.
All right.
Okay. All right, my number 6 is on the opposite side of that spectrum, complexity-wise. This is the game that you can play in high school. You can play in middle school as well. And it's a spelling game, Word on the Street. Word on the Street is a very simple, very straightforward game in which teams of kids could be finding a word that fits a criteria, finding a word that has a lot of letters that fits that criteria, and trying to pull those letters to their side, tug-of-war style, and lock them. There's a good game in there, but it's that same idea of learning without knowing you're learning, like we were talking about, in which they are going to be spelling words out loud and digging for words in their brain. It'll make them use words maybe they don't use very often in their vocabulary. I think it's a great game. I think it's wonderful for that. It could fill a few minutes with an interesting activity while refreshing their spelling, and helping their vocabulary. So that's my number 6, Word on the Street. That's an easy one to find. Check that out.
Okay.
Number 5.
My number 5 is also an electoral game from history, American history, and that is the Founding Fathers, and this is the colonial electoral system. I guess that.
No, it's about making the Constitution.
Right. Yeah, that too. But what I liked about it most was the fact that it was sending, you had to send people to the delegation. You had to send your delegates. You had to get them to vote on it. You could be voted out. And it took that system, while it didn't perfectly mimic that system, it does give you a good idea of the flow and how it generally worked out. And that's why I think Founding Fathers would be a good thing to go through in a colonial America atmosphere in your classroom, to at least help them understand the general processes that were necessary for getting the colonies together to make decisions for the entirety of the nation. So my number 5, right? 6.
Yes.
Oh,
Number 5.
Number 5.
Founding Fathers. You got a lot of history in your list.
Yes, I do. Well,
Yes, that's your thing, right? And again, this number 5 for me is a game I've used in a theater class. It's for creative thinking, for logic. I've talked about it a lot, and it's been getting a lot of love anyway lately, so I won't go into it too much. But the game is Concept. Game that just came out.
I thought about putting it on my list.
It basically encourages you to get across a concept using abstract ideas and abstract pictures and themes. And I think it works beautifully for something in that realm. Theater, English. If it's too difficult for your class, then make your own words, simplify. And if you're teaching a higher level high school class, then go at it with all the words, with all the cards that are in the game. Because some of the concepts are very complex. I think some of them might be too complex for a high school class. But it's very malleable, so you can do whatever you want with it. So that's my number 5, Concept. Very cool game.
Yeah, it was probably my top 15. I really considered that one. My number 5, everyone hates dates in high school and history class. But my game is all about dates, and I think it does it in a fun way, and that's called Timeline. Timeline is from Asmodee, and you can actually buy it. I think there are 6 versions of it now, and there's probably 2 or 3 more coming, and you can mix them all together. I don't know if you've ever played Timeline.
No, I haven't.
Essentially, I actually have it right over there in all those stacks of cards. It's a bunch of cards that show maybe historical events, or when movies came out, or when inventions happened. And what you do is on your turn, there's one card in the middle of the table. And it shows that card and the date on it. You have 4 cards in front of you. You see the sides without the dates. Okay. And you have to stick it before or after, if you think it came before or after. And then once there's 2 cards, it's before or after or in between those cards. And you keep doing that, and this timeline grows. And if you mess up and you turn over the card over and it's the wrong date, you discard that and draw a new card. But if you put a card out and the date is correct, then it stays out there.
Right.
And once you get rid of all your cards, you win. So there are some people who say, well, there's not a lot of replayability in the game. But if you mix them all together, there's a ton of replayability.
Yeah.
And I can't remember any of those dates anyway.
Right.
If you've taught kids, you know that no one ever remembers any date.
Right.
Everyone knows, 1492 and 1776. You know,
Yes.
We know like 3 or 4 dates. But it's also good to say, when did this happen? Mm-hmm. At least get kids to think logically. You know, the car was invented when? Well, probably not the 1500s.
Right.
You know, and it's fun. And it's so easy to teach. I'm really surprised it hasn't gotten more love, but it must have gotten enough love since they keep making set after set after set.
Yeah.
So that's Timeline.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good idea.
Number 4.
Okay, my number 4 is a game that has already been mentioned. Here is some of the overlap that Tom was speaking of earlier. And this is a game. This is a game series that has actually made my turkeys list of late, and rightfully so, in my opinion, because I don't use it as much as I used to, and there just isn't. Although some of my sophomore students this year shocked me at how little geographical knowledge they had.
I stopped being shocked a long time ago.
I might pull this back out, but it is the 10 Days in series. 10 Days in America and all the ones that he mentioned before. Probably in my setting, I would be more in tune for the 10 Days in the USA, because quite frankly, it's bewildering to know how little of American geography some of our American students have. So that's geography teachers. Come on, you got to pick up the slack here. You've got to teach our kids our geography. It's horrendous. Anyway, rant over. My number 4, 10 Days in series.
All right, well, what should I rant about? Kids don't know enough art these days. There's actually several art games I could have put on the list, but I'm going to put Pastiche, which there's 3 versions of Pastiche. There was Pastiche, then there's International Pastiche, and now they're coming out with Petite Pastiche, which is probably one of the worst names ever for a board game. But Pastiche shows famous paintings, so you get this, okay, this person painted this, and you just have to get colors. And it teaches, you put down tiles, and you make color combinations, so when you place a tile that's red and blue, then you get a green card. And then you need different cards to do the paintings. And so it teaches color, palette, and then it also shows the different famous paintings throughout history. So I think there's some of that in both of them. So, I mean, I think it's educational.
Yeah. I don't like the game at all, but I could see I hated it. I mean, that game gave me such a bad headache. It was so bad.
It's not that. It's like a.
It's a really bad game.
No,
but,
it's not.
But for the
He was trying to be so nice. I really didn't like that game at all.
Yeah.
But,
for the subject here at hand, absolutely, I think it's a good education.
Well, there are other ones. Have you? There are other games about painting and colors.
I think
and
that
stuff.
one does that well. I think it teaches that well. I just don't like the game.
Okay, but it is a fun game despite Zee's unenthusiasm. All right, what's your number 4?
lack of enthusiasm.
All right, my number 4 is a game that I don't think was particularly well received or even well known. This is a Fiduti game from many years ago, and it's called Terra. And Terra is a little pseudo-cooperative card game.
No, there's no cooperation.
Well, the idea, this is a weird one because it's almost like an experimental game.
Yes.
Anyway, Terra presents the players with world problems, ecological problems, diplomatic problems, military problems, and tells the players, solve the issues, but only one person's going to win the game or everyone loses. And so it presents you with dilemmas. It presents you with good discussion topics about greed, about working for the common good, about the prisoner's dilemma, about some of those concepts and some of those ideas. So I think as a game, it's okay. As a tool to teach some of these more abstract ideas, I think it's good. And I think you will lose. First of all, you're going to lose your first game no matter what. Everybody's going to die. Because everybody goes, ooh, I'm hoarding cards. You guys do the work. Everybody does that, everybody dies. and then you discuss that, and then you try again. It's about finding that balance. Anyway, I think it's an interesting game for this list. I would probably not put it on any other list we're going to do. But for this,
Ever.
I think it works.
Well, if we ever did the top 10 experiments, because I feel that this is an experiment
It is. It really
more than a
is.
game. And, instantly you said you'll lose. I've never won playing with adults, and I've always won when I played with kids. Because kids seem to cooperate a little bit more. They're like, oh, we want to win, While an adult's like, I'm not helping you.
That's also interesting. That's another discussion idea. So, again, like you said, absolutely an experiment, but I think it's an interesting one, worth checking out in a classroom setting. Tara, my number 4.
Cool.
Number 3.
Okay, my number 3 is a game that I would be cautious about using in the classroom to make sure that it's done with the right spirit, but the history thing, and it just came out in the last year, and that's Freedom, the Underground Railroad. It is an exceptional game that's done on the helping slaves escape from the South, and I think it does it in a very sensitive, good, it's a good, solid game, but the history there is immense. It's done by the Academy Games, and they put that in. I could have put any Academy game I think on this list.
Right.
1776, 1812, or 1775, 1812. Their games are just amazingly full of history. I think this one can be done well, but you have to go into it with a bit of soberness because most games and kids tend to joke and fool around, and I don't think this is a topic for that.
Right.
And I think that would be actually a good discussion point. So Freedom, the Underground Railroad is my number 3.
Yeah, very cool game about the abolitionist movement and how that came about. And that's all I'm going to say about that because my number 3 is Freedom, the Underground Railroad.
Huzzah!
Everything Tom just said, absolutely. I'm done. Cool. All right.
So that's how I shut Z up.
Efficiency. All right, my number 3 is a game that I actually use a lot, and my students ask to play it a lot. And it's a communication game that teaches you, it doesn't really teaches you, it encourages you to communicate in a number of different formats. Not just with spoken word, but also with hand gestures.
All the inflatable club.
And no, it's not that. But no, it's Time's Up. And I'm going to narrow it down to the title recall version because it tackles songs, it tackles literature, it tackles movies, it tackles a lot of different things.
But you could argue the regular Time's Up teaches you who those people are.
True.
Jacques Cousteau? I didn't know who he was until I played Time's Up.
Exactly, yeah. No, I specifically use the title recall in my classroom frequently. And usually if we have a down day of any kind, that's one of the things that my students will actually ask to play because they enjoy having to communicate in those 3 different formats. Facial expressions only, noises, words, a lot of different things. So it encourages communication on a number of different levels, not just relying upon spoken word. And that's why I use it a lot as a speech teacher. To try to get them to understand that you communicate with more than just your words. You communicate with your body language, with your facial expressions, with everything. So, title recall. Time's Up.
Huzzah.
Very good.
Number 2.
I can feel Tom's predictions coming true here, seeing as to how this game has been mentioned already. My number 2 is Timeline, which Tom mentioned, which is basically a history game. It's about dates. It's making a timeline. And guessing or hopefully knowing, but first guessing when you think events happen, plugging it into the timeline. Very simple. It takes about 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's really short.
Clean design, but it works really well as an educational game without beating you over the head with it. I think it's a fun concept to be like, ooh, do I put it between these two, or is it just after this one? Makes it a game, and I think it's fun. So, Timeline is my number 2.
Okay. My number 2 is a game that I have used in my U.S. history class while we were talking about Civil War history, and I used it to bring alive the different tactics and strategies that were used in the different battles, and that is Battle Cry. The class was smaller, so I was able to use it so that they could get a first-hand feel for it. But I encourage them to use the strategies that we learned that they used historically, and then once you see how that strategy wasn't really working out, try a different one. Try to change history. That was the whole thing. So, and it really worked out. It made those battles come alive. It made those battles become real to the student. And so that's what I've done in the past. Battle cry for Civil War history.
My number 2 I picked because I can put it up on a board and actually you don't need any pieces really, just kids can use their minds to work it out, and that is Ricochet Robots, or the more modern version that Ted Alspach did, the Mutant Meeples. Although he had special powers and such, and that works, but Ricochet Robots is real clean.
Yes.
Where you just have these spots on the board, and you're trying to figure out how to bounce one robot to a spot, maybe using the other robot in the fewest moves. And the game box, I remember when I first bought it, said like 2 to 99 players, which is impossible unless you have a big auditorium and you're putting up on the screen.
Right,
but for a class, you can. You put it up on the screen and you say, okay, here we go. Here's where the robots are. Everybody figure out how to do it, and people can do it, in their minds.
That's cool.
Oh, I can do it in 14 moves. I can do it in 12.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good. It's very similar to Robo Rally, and I almost hesitated putting them both on the list because they both kind of do the same thing. But I think Ricochet Robots does it better because it's a one-time problem.
Right.
Boom, there it is. Okay, here's another one-time problem.
That's a great choice. It didn't even come to mind, but absolutely.
All right. Are we done with number 2s? We are. To the number 1s.
And finally, number 1.
All right, it's time for the roll-off. Sam has a green die. Will that help him or not?
My own green die of power.
All right, I'm going to put it on top of my drink. Here we go. Woo!
Fail 1.
Suck.
You got a 1.
It's a 1. It's a 1.
And I got a 1 as well. The green
I'm
die
almost
works.
guaranteed to win, but dice don't hate me. Yes!
6.
The
You got a 6.
antithesis.
All right, who's first?
I will take the coveted last position, and I will let's just go down.
Okay, let's do it.
Way.
I'll be nice and quick. Again, this game has been mentioned.
Ha-ha!
Number 1 for me teaches world geography, zoology, all that good stuff, fauna, as Tom said.
Wow, it's your number 1.
Wow.
I think it's the one that does the best job of being a game and teaching.
Yeah, it
you know,
really is good in that regard.
Because it's basically a trivia game, which are historically awful. Most trivia games are bad games. This game softens that up by making it gorgeous, first of all, making it a proximity is okay, you know what I mean? Like, if you're close to the answer, that works, whereas most trivia games, it's you know it or you don't. That's it. There's no learning. There's no like, ooh, I kind of had it. And now that'll fix it in my head because I kind of thought it was here, but okay, I got to move 1 over in this region of the world. Or this animal is slightly bigger than I thought. And so you can adjust your perceptions as opposed to, I don't know, So I like that. I think it does a great job of teaching. Number 1, fauna. Absolutely. Great game for the classroom.
All right, as I said at the beginning, I don't have to like these games to put them on my list. My number 1, I hate.
What? You know what it's going to be.
I hate. Well, but to me, it was so obviously. It's like this far, educational-wise, and that's diplomacy. I don't like diplomacy. It's not a fun game for me, but in a classroom setting, I have used it to such great success. I've used it scores of times. Because you split the kids up in different groups. You say you're different countries. You have to work together outside of class, and it works like a charm. They get together. They have these. I see them at lunch, huddled around, arguing over, and it teaches them what the different political struggles are and how you have to work together. It's so amazing. I hate it with all my heart on a personal level, but in a classroom setting, it is the number 1 educational game I've ever used by far, by a mile.
Cool. All right, Mike.
Although it helps to have a projector and
Yes, it
a
does.
computer program that does all the moves for you.
Of course.
Yes, it does. My number 1, I actually battled with whether or not I should include it because it is so much like my number 2.
Twilight Imperium.
No, it is not.
It teaches space conquest, patience.
Let the record show I did not mention Twilight Imperium 3. They did. Mockingly. I don't have to mention it on every single
Monocle
list.
right now. Well,
What did you say?
I need a monocle. How dare? Well, I never.
But my number one is a game that I have used in a classroom setting, and I've used it in the same year with the same class that I used Battle Cry, and I used it to show a difference between the different tactics that were used during the Civil War and during World War II, and that is Memoir 44. And Memoir 44, especially now with the campaign book, you can take it into a whole nother realm, and you can show more on a headquarters level rather than a squad level everything that's involved in making changes to each outfit at the end of each war, different things that could happen between the different battles that will affect what you're able to commit to the battle and what you're not able to commit to the battle. So it can put into perspective a lot of different things, and it can actually provide a better storyline, I think, for all of those different World War II battles that quite frankly, they're pinpoints on a timeline, and nothing, usually not much is said about in between the battles. And you can kind of flesh that out, or at least help let their imagination flesh some of that stuff out, and it becomes more real for them. So my number one is Memoir 44.
All right. Well, that's that. I was incorrect in my prediction that we would have even one that was across all three. We had some crossover. There was a lot of games I didn't mention. I thought about moods. Remember that old game, Moods,
yes,
where you had to say something in a specific mood? There's a lot of party games that could be modified. There's every war game, political game, historical game. When people say, I don't know what game to use in the classroom, I feel like you can use almost anything and teach some sort of concept from it.
Something, yeah.
But that's it for seriousness. Our next two top 10 lists will be recording live at Dice Tower Con. So hopefully you'll be there. We're going to be talking about top 10 annoying game players in the game group. Okay, anyhow. And we'll be talking about 10 tips for game stores. A local game store.
Woo, yeah.
It's going to get nasty.
So anyway, if you'll be at Dice Tower Con, we'll see you then. If not, we'll see you when we post these in a couple weeks. Until next time, I'm Tom Vasel.
I'm Zee Garcia.
And I'm Sam Healey.
And we're educational. The more you know.